Hello, this is Phil. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a simple database application in AOZ Studio using the Google Firebase platform for authentication and data storage. So I'm in AOZ Studio here. I'll just give you a quick look at the code and I'll run this application. So I've currently got this configured to support 3 different sign-in providers. So we've got the Google, we've got GitHub, and we've got email. And for Google and GitHub, the application has to be running on a website with a domain, because you have to whitelist the domain name against these two, which you have to do in the Firebase console. I'll show you where we can do that. And so because I'm running locally, I'm just going to use the sign in with an email method. So now what this is, it's recognized that I've not actually created an account yet, so it's asking me to put in my first and last name. So this is essentially registering me with the Firebase side of things. So that'll actually create me an account in Firebase and it's authenticated me against the application. So what I can do now at this stage in the app, it's empty, there's no items in my to-do list, so I can click this button to add a new one. And when I enter that, that has then been persisted in the Firebase database. So let's just add another couple more. So we've got 3 items. I can use the cursor up and down key to select a different item. And I've got an update function, so I can actually click this. This is updated. That's updated that one. And I can also use a delete function as well. I can obviously just keep deleting all these. And then the last function here is to log out of the application, and this will actually log me out of the Firebase authentication. And I'm back at the login screen there. So if I refresh this, it'll always send me back here. If I want to sign back in, I just need to put the same username and password in. Now, with Firebase authentication, you can tell it to persist persist the authentication between sessions. So I've got it configured to do that. So if I close this and then run the application again, it'll automatically log me in using the same credentials. So I don't need to sign in each time into the app unless I've logged out. Now that behavior can be changed. You can tell Firebase to actually, if when I close this, you can tell it to actually get rid of that sign in session so that next time you come back to the application, it'll ask you to sign back in. So I'll show you where you can do that as well in the code. So that's the application. Now if we go to firebase.google.com, so this is where all the information is about Firebase. And we want to go to the docs and we'll go to the build section. So you can see there we've got a section there on authentication. So if you went to authentication and web and sign in with a pre-built UI, so this is the functionality that I've used in AOZ Studio to accommodate the authentication side of things. So this basically tells you everything you need to do in here. So this is all JavaScript. I'll show you how that's all been integrated into AOZ Studio code. So that's the section on authentication there. And if we go further down here, we've got this Cloud Firestore. Cloud Firestore is the database that I'm using to store the to-do list items. So it's pretty simple to set up. You obviously need a Google account. So create yourself a Google account, come back here, and if you go to the console, this button at the top right, that'll actually take you to the developer console. So if you've just created a fresh account, this will be empty. I've got a couple of projects already in here. This is the one that I've used for the demo. So what I'll do, rather than going into that one, I'll create a brand new one and we'll go from there. So click the Add Project button. So you just need to give it a name. So we'll call this a demo video to-do list. I'll click continue on that. We don't want the Google Analytics for this project as it's just a demo project. So a few seconds later, that'll all be created for us. So click continue here, and that'll take us into the developer console. So this is everything to do with the demo video to-do list application. Now just something to mention, these obviously hit some costs, so it's not free to use. Well, sorry, it is free to use up to a certain level. So you can see there down here that I'm on this Spark, what they call a Spark plan, and it basically allows you to have so many database transactions a month at a free level. So for something like this free level, just to show you, you do actually get quite a lot. So here you can see in the cloud Firestore, you can do 20,000 document writes a day, 50,000 reads and 20,000 deletes. So unless you've got a really busy application, you're probably never going to go anywhere near these free limits. And if you thought you were going to go over these, then you can upgrade and go to this Blaze plan. And you can see there that the costs there is zero, well, what's that, 6 cents for 100,000 reads. So we're using the free Spark plan. If we go back to the console, let's come back here. What we want to do is create the Firebase app. Now you can either create an iOS, an Android, or a web app. Now obviously we want to create a web application. So click this button here and we're going to give it a name. So I'm going to call it demo video to-do list. Now ignore this Firebase hosting. That's if you were developing an application that then you're going to host on the Google cloud platform, which we're not going to do. And click register app. So this is the important piece. This configuration code here is what we need to put into our application. So take a note of these items here. So what we'll do, I'll just copy that, put that into Notepad for now, because we'll use that later. So this is the code that we're going to need in the AOZ Studio application code. So put that to one side and continue to console. So that's it, we've created the application. What we're going to do next is go to this Authentication tab. And we're going to click the Get Started. Our first thing we want to do is configure which sign-in methods or sign-in providers we want to support in the application. So for this demo, we're going to support email and password. So we can just enable that. And we're going to support Google. We'll just give this the same name as the object name, and we've got to put a support email, so this will probably default to your Google account email. So we've got Google and email. Now the other ones, let's say you wanted to support GitHub. If you go in here, you can enable that, but then you need to go into your GitHub account and get a client ID and a client secret from the OAuth authentication side of things. And in fact, let's do that now. So if we go to my GitHub and you go to settings, go to the developer settings, and you go to OAuth app. And you can see there that I've already created one. But what we'll do, we'll create another one for this demo. And we'll give it a name. So we'll give it the same name, give it video to-do list. So the home page, let's pretend that it's on my website. Now this authorization callback URL, this is the one that it's giving us in the Firebase console. So you just need to copy this out of here and put that into there. And we can register that application. In fact, let's make this a different one. So this is where you would deploy this application. So we'll register it there. So now that you've done that, you can copy this client ID, put that into there, and we'll generate a new client secret. Copy that and save that. So that's GitHub enabled, Google enabled, and email and password enabled. So what we need to do next is enable, if we just go to users first, on this users tab, this is where you'll see the list of users that have been authenticated against the application. So let's go to the Firestore Database tab. So this is where you access your data in the database. So we need to create one initially. And what it's going to do here is ask us whether we're going to be in production mode or test mode. So what this is actually asking is how you want your database rules, setting up sort of the security rules. So we'll just leave this in starting production mode and we'll click next. And then we need to choose a region of where we want our data to be. So I'm just going to choose the Europe. That does take a few seconds to complete, but once that's done, it'll take you to the console. As you can see in here, you've got, this is where your data will be. We'll come back and have a look in here when we start adding some items, but you could actually go in here and start creating data manually in this interface, which we're not going to do. So in the rules, what this is basically saying is to allow read and write if this condition is true. So at the moment, because that's set to false, it's not going to let us read or write anything into the database. So what we want to do on the database is to only allow authenticated users to access it. So we can change this database rule to request.auth. So that's basically saying if the request.auth object is not null, then we're going to allow read and write on the database. So click the publish button. That puts that live. Now just one other thing on authentication. Because we're wanting to support the Google and the GitHub, in order for those to work, you've got to authorize a domain.
So if we go down to here, you can see the list of authorized domains. These are being put in by default. But what we can do is we'll put the AOZ Studio published domain in here. Add that domain. And that's it. That's all we have to do in the Firebase console. The rest of the work now we can do in the application itself. So if we switch to the code, if we scroll down a little bit, you can see that you've just got some references to the Firebase JavaScript APIs. And if we go a little bit further down, this code here is just waiting for the browser to load these JavaScript files. And then the next bit of code is the initialization of Firebase. So this configuration here is the data that we copied when we created the application in the console. What we need to do is just copy these in. So we'll copy that, put that in here. And that's basically it for the configuration side of things. If we run this application now, we've got the free sign-in methods that we configured. And if we sign in with an email, it's going to see that I've not got an account for this application. So we'll log in. And if we go back to the Firebase console and have a look in Authentication, look at users, you can see there it's actually added me in as a user. And let's go back to the app. If we add a new item, oops. Yeah, so we can clearly see that the data has been added into the Cloud Firestore. As you can see, this is what the collection name is, to-do list. This is the ID that it's given. So this is a unique identifier for the record. And then these are the three fields that we're adding. You can see the text is there, that's what I typed in. And then it's putting a timestamp on there. And it's also giving or storing the user ID that this to-do list item belongs to. So that allows you to have, when somebody else signs into the application, their user ID will be in here. And then when we're retrieving the records for a particular user, we can just use a query to return only the items for that particular user. So the question is, why is this still empty, even though it's been put in the database? If we have a look at the code that's actually retrieving the items, you can see there that we've got db.collection to-do list. So that's the collection name. And that's what this name is here. So that refers to that. And what we're doing is we're saying basically, give me all the records where the user ID field, which is this field here, is equal to the logged in user's user ID. And then what it's also going to do then, it's going to order the records by the timestamp. So we'll get them in the order that they were added. And we're also going to limit the number of items to 1,000. Now, something I haven't mentioned is in your database, you've got this indexes tab. Now, if you're doing a compounded query where you're using, where you've got an order by clause on, you need to create an index. Now, there's a couple of ways to do that. You can go in here and actually manually create the index yourself. But a useful tip is if you look in the code, you can see if this fails for any reason, it's going to console out the error. So if we in here now press F12 to get to the dev tools, you can see there that we've actually got a Firebase error telling us that there's a query index required, and it also gives us a link here, which we can just click on that, and it'll take us into the console where it'll predefine the index or the required index needed. So we can just go ahead and click the create index, and that'll take a few seconds to build. Sometimes it's it's probably a good couple of minutes actually to build that. So after a couple of minutes, the status will be changed to enabled, and if we go back to the app, close this off. So in the app now, if we refresh that, we need to close the debugger. There you go, you can see now it's popped that one up. So we'll just add another one in here. And if we go back to the Firebase console, have a look at the data. You can see there now we've got 2 items. I could obviously go in here, change these, edited from Firebase, put that in there, update that, and then that will be reflected in the application. Refresh. You see there, it's pulled that in. So if we log out of here, and we'll close this off, and let's publish this application so we can test the Google. So because we're running here, we should be able to still sign in with the username and password. Still use that method. So that takes it in. So we log out and we sign in using, let's sign in using GitHub. So we have to log in using your GitHub account details. Can't remember my email address, hotmail.com. So if we authorize that, that should then, it's detected that we've already got an account, which we do in this application. So we have to put the password in for that. Now, what you can do while you're playing around and testing with this, you can see there it's in the users under authentication. You can see that it's got 2 providers that I've used to log into the app. And what we can do, you can obviously delete these from this interface. You can delete the account. If we do that though, we're going to lose access to the data that we've already stored in the Firebase console. So if we have a look at the data, because this user ID will change, so these will basically become orphaned. So just to show you this, delete these 2 items. You see there, they've gone now from the database. So I'll just delete my account. And if we go back to the application that's running on the published AOZ Studio site, we'll just refresh that. It should log us out. Yeah, so we're now logged out. So now we should be able to sign in with the GitHub, and it won't ask us for, it won't detect that we've already got another account. So there you go, it's logged us straight in. And if we refresh this, it'll log us in again and return into the Firebase console. If we refresh that, you can see there it's added us back in, and it's telling us which provider it is. Something I'm not sure what will happen here if we log out and sign in with Google, because it's the same email address. I can choose my email account. I think that'll just sign me in, and then in the Firebase console, if we refresh this, you'll see that it's replaced the GitHub one with the Google So yeah, the retrieval code is pretty simple. Like I say, it's you just get a reference to the Firebase API, and then this line of code here does the retrieval, and all that does, it returns a query snapshot, and that's got a number of documents in it. And then this bit of code just loops around that, and it's pulling out the data. So the doc.data refers to these items here, and the doc.id, which is this item, that's this set of data. So that's the unique identifier for this set of data. And then all the code is doing there is it's looping round the records that got returned, and it's putting them into the AOZ Studio array, which are named here. And then what we can do after this is completed, you'll be able to see in the code that at some point further down here, yeah, so this little bit of code here, that's just looping round and putting the data on the screen, just using a locate and a print. So that's pretty simple. So what about the update? So when we're doing an update, we're just grabbing the input from the user, and then the piece of Firebase code is here. So it's just a bit of JavaScript. And again, all we're doing is saying for the collection that's got that name, to-do list, and we do a doc, and we pass in the ID of the record that we want to update. So the ID is this, and then we just do an update, and then we pass in a JavaScript object for the data or the fields that we want to update. So this to-do text refers to this, and then the var.astring is what the user inputted up here. And then there's just it can either be successful or there might be an error. In my code here, I'm not too bothered if it fails. It'll just go back to the menu. Delete, very similar. This is a piece of code here, so it's the same again. Collection reference, passing in the ID of the item that's been selected, and we'll just do a dot delete. That's pretty simple. So again, I'm not too bothered if that fails. It'll just return to the menu and display the records again. And then for the add, so we're getting the user input, and this time round, what we're going to do, we do a similar thing. We use the .add method, and we're passing in all three items here. So this is where you can see we're creating a document with these three fields: to-do text, user ID, timestamp. So that's how we get these fields put in the database. And then what we're also doing here is we're looking on here to see if the request was successful or not, because we basically need to know whether to select that new item in the interface. So this is all this is doing down here. So if it was successful, then we're setting the selected item to whatever the total was before we added this, and we're adding one to that. So the last piece of Firebase code is the sign out button, and it's pretty straightforward. We're just going to do this line of code here to say that sign him out, and then if it was successful, this will actually sign him out of the system. Now you may notice that I'm not actually setting any variable to say that that's been signed out. What we need to do is go back up to the code where we initialize everything, and we skipped over this at the start because I knew we'd come back to that. So once you've initialized the configuration that we put in, this is the piece of code that will auto sign a user in when they've previously been logged in before and they've closed the browser and they come back in. This piece of code runs at the start, and what this will do is if the user's already logged in, the user here will be returned from this function. But what this also does, it also monitors this. So if the authentication state changes, let's say they log into another browser and they log out on that one, this piece of code will actually run down here. When this is sent to Firebase, the code up here then runs automatically. And then this piece of code down here sends them to the do user sign in page. And by the time that happens, user signed in will be 0 because this piece of code is run here. And then we go through as if we've just started the application from afresh, and it'll go through and do the sign-in process. You've got the three methods, the add, update, and delete. They're the key things that you need for any database application. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed that.